Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and welcome to the Tiny Bookcase. Right now, you're listening to our favourite part of the week.
Stories, discussion, and a high likelihood of gratuitous obscenities, all to sate the hunger of the bibliomancer Ysteris.
Regular listeners will know how it works, but for newcomers, Nico and I have both written a story to the same shared prompt.
We're about to share those stories with each other and you for the first time. Then we'll workshop them on mic. The prompt for this episode is monkey. So, Ben, let's have your simian story.
Monkey. Wang's shout indicated the monkey had returned. The man, nervous as a freshly shanghaied sailor, had expressed a desire to shoot the animal on more than one occasion, whilst Robert, desperate to relieve some of the pressure of the mission, had been secretly feeding it. That nonsense had, of course, stopped once they'd crossed the border and entered tea country. Robert was a professional mischief maker, but not one who would banjax his own mission. Unwanted monkey attention could turn the whole affair into a farce he would be reluctant to pen in his report to the company. Despite his lack of secretly proffered food, the monkey still shadowed them. It flitted between branches above until the day's heat grew oppressive. Then it would rest in the shade, only to catch them once more as they ascended by steep paths into the high reaches of the Wuxi Shan Hills. "If I had a gun, I would eat this monkey," muttered Wang in English between huge puffs of breath as he dragged the wheeled cases Robert had insisted they bring. "You would get suck boil." Robert too was out of breath as he dragged a second case. "It would be worth the pain." Both cases were the size of small handcarts and disguised as though they carried mundane items and valuables, such as a dignitary might take with them on lengthy inspection tours. However, they concealed small glass houses which Robert intended to put to good use, should he avoid discovery. 15 years earlier, Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward had promoted their use for the successful transportation of delicate flora on long sea voyages. Robert Fortune aimed to use the Wardian cases to breach a 2,000-year-old Chinese secret. Sweating and panting, Robert gratefully sat in the shade whilst Wang started a fire by the roadside. They would drink their tea bought locally and totally unlike the green beverage he had first experienced in London. As he waited, Robert plucked the small note from the pockets of his Changshan robe and read it one last time. "Besides the collection of tea plants and seeds from the best localities for transmission to India, it will be your duty to avail yourself of every opportunity of acquiring information as to the cultivation of the tea plant and the manufacture of tea as practiced by the Chinese, and on all other points with which it may be desirable that those entrusted with the superintendence of the tea nurseries in India should be made acquainted." The note had once been sealed and stamped with the sigil of a heart, bearing the initials E.I.C. Though he had long since broken it open, he had read it over and over again until the paper curled and the ink smudged. Robert placed it carefully in Wang's tea fire and watched it disintegrate into smouldering ash. The stump-tailed macaque gave out a hideously mocking howl from the branches above, and he looked up to see it staring down at him. Robert felt as though it was seeing through his disguise, and felt the fear rise in him. The monkey flinched away as Wang scooped up a handful of pebbles from the road and flung them at it. "No need to hurt the thing." "I will kill it." The same fear Robert felt shined obviously in the eyes of his helper. Much was at stake. The Chinese were not fond of foreign spies, nor the locals who helped them. "Calm yourself. We'll be there this afternoon. You must be ready to speak with them convincingly." Wang nodded in response, and the two men sat in silence as they drank the bitter but restorative brew. Minds sharpened, they made the last leg of their journey when the sun's warmth had cooled. The bright green velvet of the tea fields around them was cut up by pickers' paths and the steep tiering necessary for cultivation at that altitude. Gnats buzzed around Robert as they waited for the gates to be opened. From within the walled manufactory came smells of coal smoke and the rustling clatter of industry. The double gate bore in large, swirling calligraphic strokes, an ode to tea which he read and reread as they waited to be admitted. The best quality tea must have the creases like the leather boots of Tartar horsemen, curl like the dewlap of a mighty bullock, unfold like a mist rising out of a ravine, gleam like a lake touched by a zephyr, and be wet and soft like earth newly swept by rain. A factory official soon emerged, and bowed his head in greeting to both Wang and the noble inspector Robert was disguised as. His features masked with grease paint and performer's putty, Robert watched Wang as he discussed their entry. The foreman inspected their documents, though he did so carelessly with a level of ritual intended to be flattering. Robert kept his face still, and his heart beat faster with every moment the man stared at the forged documents. The welcoming smile on the man's face when he agreed to the inspection sent a trill of excitement thrumming through Robert. He felt giddy as they were walked through the compound. Secrets were unfurled for him like a flower in bloom, and Robert, with all the ravenous attention of a bee, collected every bit of knowledge as though it were delicious pollen. They saw the giant woven screens on which the new cut tea was dried in the sun before being placed in the cooking room. Green tea spent less time in the sun than black tea, though both would ultimately be subjected to great heat. Sweating workmen stoked rows of smoky furnaces, whose fire heated giant woks in which the leaves were agitated fiercely until they curled up to a third of their original size. Next, teams of workmen rolled the leaves out with heavy pins to encourage all of the oils from the plant matter. What remained was very nearly tea, and the process, which had confounded his fellow botanists, revealed its final secrets. Robert watched as sorters sifted through the tea and placed handfuls of it into graded bins. He observed the tea destined for Europeans was subjected to another step. Prussian blue and yellowing gypsum powders were combined with the tea then to give it a striking green hue when stewed. Robert pocketed some of the dyes for further inspection, and as he did so, he heard mayhem break out behind him as the macaque scampered through workstations and leapt past the foreman to land heavily on his shoulder. The monkey pulled at him, knocking his cap from his head, and Robert threw his hands up to protect his face. Wang hefted a broom which had lain against the wall and cracked the monkey in its side. It fell, and Wang was on him before he could continue his mischief. The stiff broom handle rose and fell repeatedly, and madness gilded Wang's face as he broke the skin and bone of his monkey tormentor. Robert, barely able to stop himself from admonishing Wang in English, watched in horror as his helper beat the monkey viciously. The look of anguish on its small face was too human to bear, and two of the workmen intervened as the broom snapped across the monkey's back. Robert took his cap back from the foreman, who seemed unmoved by what had just happened. The monkey tried to rise, but its bandy legs were broken. It left a smear of red when the workmen dragged it from the factory floor. Wang was smiling, revelling in his victory, but Robert felt sick as they left the factory. They managed to claim cuttings from the tea bushes they passed on their descent from those high hills, and were soon well on their way to journey home. The world seemed quiet without Robert's monkey shadow, emptier than it had been before. British India would have tea by his hand, but he wondered on whether it was worth the cost. Avarice leads to blood, and when the Empire's ploys of silver and opium had failed, they had sent for Robert Fortune. He felt a growing understanding of the path his countrymen and paymasters were taking, that there would come a time when they, having gobbled up everything else of value in the world, would be forced to consume themselves. Robert would not shake their hands when he returned, he decided, not for all the tea in China.
Sad for that monkey, man.
Yeah.
That metaphorical monkey and the things it represents. The guilt, the burgeoning guilt of the monkey.
the victim of colonialization as personified in a monkey.
Yeah. I will say, my favourite 3-word combo you have ever written is unwanted monkey attention. I wrote that down the moment you said it. Also, it was quite early on in the story that I did write the note, spooky bad time monkey, which...
Spooky bad time monkey.
I was like, there's something going on with this guy. But no, it's Lots of really nice descriptions of tea in its various forms, and that, by the way. One that really stood out was talking about the tea fields looking like bright green velvet.
Mm.
It's because it's so unusual to think of it in that state. Because now, whenever I think
Yeah.
of tea, I think of dried tea, and
Mm.
it's really just
The color on it is incredible. Like if you were to Google like Chinese tea fields or something like that,
yeah,
it is just amazing. But it's also like it's very one note. Like the color is very just
yeah,
green, but then it's still quite rough because they are quite coarse little bushes. These tea bushes.
yeah,
Um, so it wouldn't. I went for velvet because sort of like crushed velvet has that textured look to it,
yeah, kind of like
almost like,
speckly.
yeah, like shadows in itself from where it's textured.
I I couldn't help my internal vision when you said about he's got the prosthetics and the grease paint on to get into this factory.
I
I
think I know where you're going
couldn't
with this.
I couldn't help but think of Sean Connery's Bond in You Only Live Twice.
Yes, yes, yeah. That would have. Yeah, that's basically it. That's not where I thought you were going with it. I thought you were going to say Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder, but yeah,
No, no,
yeah.
the
Bond
fully
is
an English spy pretending to be Asian, not very
not very
convincingly.
convincingly yes. So this is one of my classic ones. This actually happened.
No,
Yeah, this is real. Robert Fortune is a
up
real
to and
person.
including the monkey madness,
No,
or
the monkey was entirely me. That was me doing some
wait,
monkey
you
medical
were the
madness.
monkey?
I was the monkey. But
But okay, so they fully sent a guy whose name was
Robert
Rob
Fortune.
Fortune.
Yeah, he's a
Oh,
yeah.
that has to be a real name, because if you'd made that up, I would have called you a hack.
Yeah, no, no. It sounds like it's like a Jason Bourne, James Bond, Robert Fortune. Like
Yeah,
it sounds like a pulp spy thriller
like that
hero.
could be Han Solo's name. You could just swap it
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yeah.
You could swap that out dead easily. Um, the big thing here is that I need to make sure that I cite that I actually encountered this anecdote in a documentary I was watching recently and followed it
Okay.
up. And there was a very good book by someone called Sarah Rose called "For All the Tea in China: How England Stole the World's Favorite Drink and Changed History." Um, and there's an abridged version of it, sort of adapted for an article in the Smithsonian magazine.
Oh wow.
Um, so if anybody's interested, go and check that out. You'll see a lot of what I pulled on for the story in there. Um, but yeah, it just struck me. It's just I didn't really believe it the first time I heard it, and I looked it up, and this actually did happen. You know, this guy, this Scottish botanist, straight up disguised himself as though he were Chinese, and with his helper Wang, infiltrated a tea plantation, discovered the secrets of tea making, and stole samples of tea. And that's where all of the tea that's we as British people we associate tea quite strongly with India.
Yeah.
That's where all of the tea and tea cultivation and plantations in India came from this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
absolutely fascinatingly, right?
Yeah.
You know the
Go
bit
on.
about um, the dyes that they're colouring the tea with.
Yeah.
So that's also real, because at the time British people liked the fact that it was green, like that it made the tea green.
Okay.
But the Chinese people that were making it didn't really understand why British people liked it like that, and were just trying to create it to like meet the demand.
Right.
Prussian blue and gypsum are both poisonous,
Yeah.
so they were like non-intentionally poisoning huge swathes of Britain
just,
with
just full of chemical warfare by accident.
by accident. Yeah, to the point where I read that and I thought, was that by accident, or were they really fucking pissed off that the British had destroyed their economy with silver and then destroyed a lot of their like society with opium, and they were like, we're gonna get you with tea.
Oh, do you like that? Oh, you want to try the green version?
I'm
It's
gonna try the
delicious.
green stuff. Yeah,
I just so I don't forget to say it as well. I loved the phrase "the ravenous attention of a bee."
yeah,
That's it's got so much in it. I mean, I love bees anyway. That's something you
yeah.
all know, but the listeners won't. But that kind of there's only one drive to them. They only know how to do one thing, and that's go out and find what they're meant to find.
Very single-minded.
Just a great little turn of phrase. Really,
Mm,
really good. Really
thank
liked
you.
that.
This was sort of, I was saying last week that I did that sort of modelling exercise to try and
Yeah,
play with Hemingway's style. This one was supposed to be around the descriptions. I for myself, I don't think it's one of my strongest stories. I think it's very much then this happened, then this happened. Um, there's the monkey metaphor maybe saves it a little bit, but what I was enjoying about this process and what I enjoyed about when I performed the story was the descriptions in it, and the smells and the sights and the sounds and the heat that I think pervades it.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's I think a big part of that tea imagery, that kind of like steamy, hot.
yes,
That fits very well, and it's I think because we know tea so well, it does that pulls through in a big way.
it's rather amazing, isn't it? This caffeine is actually produced as a like an anti um, like a defense mechanism against insects by using
Yeah,
plants. And then,
so
we
good.
humans, as a massive insect, are like, oh my god, this tea's great. Grow more of it and eat it.
Gimme, gimme.
Um, yeah. But you've got to wonder what the world was like before caffeinated beverages. Like, especially in England, people just sort of like drinking bad water and beer. Like, how did anything get done? Whereas now,
And
like, we're
there's a
all
lot of
addicted to
chewing
it.
of roots and stuff, wasn't there?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm sort of asking a question. I think, like, how did society function before people could have a morning coffee or a tea?
I
Because
mean, there weren't so many offices at that point, which I think
yeah,
made it
true,
slightly easier.
true. But like even like so then okay, so then what about all the science and interesting intellectual thought and engineering works and stuff that went on before tea?
Yeah, that's true.
Like it must have been harder to do it. So I thought,
But then there are things that humans are very good at pushing the boundaries of what we are, what we're capable of and what we're fueling ourselves with, and the whole French art movement discovering absinthe and then going mad on it for about 50 years. That's the sort of thing where whatever we had before tea, which has stuck around quite pervasively,
yeah,
there must have been something that was like, oh, do you know what what are the guards chewing to stay up all night on the gate? That would be interesting. Yeah, that would be really interesting to know, wouldn't it?
yeah. Like how would you get through a night shift without caffeine? Like maybe we're just sort of like soft modern boys. I don't know, but like it seems like it would be a lot harder to just be if you can't
Yeah.
press the caffeine button.
Please don't hit me in my soft modern tummy. I need the caffeines.
And again, I think this also came a little bit from the chat we had last week about Empire and stuff like that as well. I
Yeah.
think I wanted to, this is someone that helped proliferate Empire and the sort of British India and the East India Company, and he's deep in this and he's a real person. But I've sort of posited him as someone that is potentially already being able to see the problems that that's going to bring, because someone must have seen what was happening. You'd have thought, you'd have hoped.
Yeah.
Mm. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my monkey tale, my simian story.
Oh. Well, it would be a monkey tail, because if it doesn't have a monkey, it's an ape. If it doesn't have a monkey, it's an ape. If it doesn't have a tail, it's an ape. Me done word real good.
Tell me a story, boyo.
Right, you are.
Would you like to take that one again?
No, I like
No.
it. And I'm leaving this in. Monkey. It all started with a birthday wish. Apparently, the child named Thomas Benson had made said wish. This child, who was possessed not of the deductive reasoning necessary to know that he was dooming the world, but instead a level of supernatural power hitherto unseen on Earth, had, as stated, fucked it all. The wish was hard to extract at first. No one knew the source. But once young Tommy had told his father that he thought he might be responsible for the absolute carnage taking place outside, and further to that the authorities had taken Mr. Benson seriously, we got it plain as day. I wish that movies were real. Which we can all agree is, as wishes go, a bit shit. Miles of room for error, absolutely no clarity in its parameters, and most importantly of all, a bit pointless. But the child was blessed in some way, or cursed, I suppose, depending on your perspective, and thus we got little Tommy's wish. Tommy, incidentally, was destroyed in a controlled explosion, like a packed lunch left unattended in an airport terminal. That's not particularly common knowledge. Most of this is, in fact, not well known. The things people did need to know were found out quickly. Very conveniently, whenever anyone turned their television on, the relevant news stories were just starting. That, in retrospect, could have been a clue. The nature of the news was, however, extremely distracting. An awful lot of things were happening all at once. A great many people's cars had become inexplicably capable of flight, for example, which was helpful for those who had any experience as pilots, and an absolute fucking nightmare for everyone else. When it all started, I was working in a museum. Thankfully, one without an Egyptology exhibit, as I'm led to believe those got extremely unpleasant very quickly. I was working as the 27th most leading primatologist in the United Kingdom, a fact I only found out when it was explained to me that the 26 predecessors had all become unavailable for a variety of reasons. Some did have mummies on their sites, and one, I am told, had worked on an island in the Americas, and in fact was eaten by dinosaurs. In some ways, I'm a little jealous. I was approached to assist with what the American man who came to find me called a giant monkey. Obviously, I'd seen the ape in the papers. When it appeared, they called it King Kong, of course. Then Universal stepped in and wanted to claim it as their own. Intellectual property laws and all that. Then it ate 3 studio executives, a cameraman, and a bus full of nuns, instead of the huge mound of overripe bananas they'd offered it. They decided then it was someone else's problem, but the name was still technically theirs. So the papers had taken to calling it Monkey King, which irritated me terribly, because clearly it was a member of the great ape family. I digress. The American, a military equivalent of a research scientist, who, thanks to the rules now in effect, could not put his gun down, informed me I was the only man for the job. I, being thus propelled, as characters always are, knew I had no choice but to begrudgingly accept. They flew me to New York, where it had taken up residence. Their plan at the time was to ask me if it could be lured up the Empire State Building so they could throw biplanes at it. I assured them it was unlikely to do that, as it wasn't even the tallest building in the town anymore. They were crestfallen, but I remained unsurprised. I was, after all, English, so they'd taken an instant dislike to me. I'm still sure somehow that I will be revealed to be the villain. With the strangeness came a number of years of fascination. I followed a great ape around in order to see what it did, and that was very interesting for about a week. I got my forklift license to assist with moving its turds after 6 months, and after a year took to watching it on a monitor. Then the strangeness of this world became mundane to its inhabitants. A lot of people were dead on account of the endless monster attacks, murderers, alien invasions, and children booby-trapping their suburban homes, so we settled into a new sort of groove. It was a reasonably good time to be a scientist, all things considered. Ideas seemed to come more easily, and people knew your name a lot. If you could put aside muscular men bursting in the middle of the night to ask what they should do about the chimp-shark crossbreeds attacking Missouri at I Recommended Fire, which apparently worked shockingly well but smelled awful, then it was wonderful. It's been 25 years to the day since the wish was made. I actually celebrate it every year. Little Tommy Benson's birthday. I try not to make wishes at all. Look what one can do with an unsupervised wish. I simply hope to train the next generation of primatologists, because the Monkey King and its inaccurate name aren't going anywhere, if I have anything to say about it. So do me a favour and turn the news off. Yes, I know, there's an apocalypse happening, but there is always, and will always, be an apocalypse happening. The countdown timer will always stop at 1, the bright idea will always strike almost too late, but just in the nick of time, and the beautiful girl will always swan off with someone else, and we, the scientists, will always solve the thing before someone else runs off to solve the thing. So put that jar of formaldehyde down and limp up to the roof for me. We need these lightning rods up before sunrise. If anyone figures out the Monkey King's already dead, I'm out of a job, and you are too. But he'll be up and about in no time, I'm sure of it. Just like in the movies.
Great last line, just like in the movies. That was coming for a while, that line. I
Yeah.
liked it. I liked that a lot. One interesting lens to examine that concept through, as if movie rules actually existed in the real world, and they governed reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you've done it from a primatologist speaking about basically King Kong. That is a really interesting take on that. Where did you get that from? Like, did that just pop into your head when you heard the prompt, or has that been coming for a while?
There were a few ideas, so I found Monkey quite challenging. There were a lot of things that it sparked, but none of them felt like a whole story.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
that does happen, doesn't it?
yeah, it's always a bit of a bugger when it happens. And I'll derail it slightly just to tell you that I could not stop thinking about a really stupid joke,
Go on.
which is two monkeys are getting in the bath. One says, ooh, ooh, ah, ah, and the other one says, put some cold in then. Anyway, so that was all that was going through my head since we had this prompt. And but I landed. Part of me was looking at. I thought, do I want to write something about Sun Wukong, which would have been interesting for us both end up in China.
Yeah, that would be
But
interesting.
I sort of landed on what would the practicalities of King Kong being real be. And I kept thinking
Yeah.
about this idea of moving huge amounts of excrement just so it couldn't throw them, because that would be absolutely devastating to the population. And it just sort of morphed into this. What if that happened because all of a sudden a bunch of things from films were real, and someone just had to deal with it?
I enjoyed the line that the Empire State Building isn't even the tallest building in New York anymore.
Yeah,
That was very well done. He'd probably have to climb the One World Trade Center or something. It would have to be,
yeah,
which then has some really dark connotations. So,
yeah. It does.
yeah,
The there was an interest, kind of a fun decision with the voice, and I wasn't sure if I should have a line in there about it, and maybe I would in retrospect.
mm.
But that everyone in England had either started talking like that or in a really broad Cockney accent.
Yes, no, that should go in. That should go in.
Yeah,
I would like that. It was the first thing I wrote down was sort of old news broadcaster voice. It almost sounded like it might have had like the crackle of a gramophone over it.
oh yeah, that would
You know
sound really
that.
cool.
Yeah, so I think that worked really well. But yeah, maybe a line near the start about that would be cool. Because I didn't fully get that from context, but maybe I was just being
Yeah.
thick. Um,
No, I needed to make it clearer. I think, like and having been from Doncaster originally, I was quite shocked to find myself speaking like this, because I don't think there's even actually any clue in there that voice is the voice. It's
no,
just because it's to be performed. I knew it was, so
yeah, yeah,
that's
no.
definitely an instance of writing for the medium and
Hmm.
not thinking about that.
I think a line in there, and you've solved that.
Yeah,
I think and I think that's a good bit of world building as well. So I like that. Um, I thought it was very well observed. Like, you obviously have a deep wealth of knowledge and understanding of how movies work and the oddities of it. But I thought it was very well observed that you centered it around the news being on at just the right point.
Yeah,
I like that.
it's so funny to me in films when that happens because someone will invariably phone someone else and say, "You need to put on the news." They turn on the TV, it's on the right channel, and a story that the other person somehow knows about is just starting.
Yeah.
So how did the other person know? It's always
Yeah.
bothered me.
Yeah, no, I can see that. You sort of want it to happen where they catch the cricket scores instead. They have to listen to all the cricket before it comes back around at the top of the hour.
Oh god, yeah, the 24-hour news cycle. You've got to hear about the shipping lanes or whatever.
I had a real suspending my disbelief moment when you said that there was a British museum without mummies in it, because we've got
Oh,
canoptic jars coming out of our asses, so that's
mate,
unlikely.
we're not giving them back, even if they start eating people. Yeah, I think the mummies thing was floating in my brain because I saw a post the other day on actually on a Dungeons and Dragons group where someone said, "So if zombies get you, they sort of eat your brain, and if vampires get you, they bite you and drink your blood. If a mummy catches you, does it just like beat you up or something? What
Yeah.
what do they do?" I didn't know the answer.
Do they like weigh your soul or something? Do they do something, or do they
I mean,
just spank your ass?
in the mummy, they just cause havoc, don't they? Just
Yeah.
put plagues on you.
Good old plagues. Hey.
Suppose it's just a bit cursy. That's
Yeah.
normally what happens.
26 unavailable predecessors. I think that was really funny. That's how I know that I'm the 27th because the previous 26 were dead or something.
Yeah.
It's I like that a lot. There was quite a lot of interesting stuff about copyright in there as well, and with
Yeah.
the recent, Disney losing the copyright to Steamboat Willie or whatever, the
Yes.
the first Mickey Mouse. Um, this is a pressing issue, isn't it? In a way, this is going to be a big deal.
I mean, yeah, we're 9 years off of King Kong having been about for 100 years in popular fiction,
Damn.
which is kind of crazy to think about, isn't it? Actually,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it
bloody
is.
hell. And yeah, Godzilla's been about for 70 years. All these things that are still popular, they're getting on.
Yeah, yeah. It has been odd though when things have gone, free of copyright. Like like when Winnie the Pooh
Yes,
um went and somebody made like a horror movie about
it was
Winnie the
called
Pooh.
Blood and Honey.
Blood and Honey, that's it. I've not seen it, but maybe I should. But before I start talking about it, but basically that is such an interesting thing to do. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing to do with it, but it's an interesting thing to do with it, isn't it?
I mean, we got to make like a super arsey Steamboat Willie movie now, right? Called like Steamboat Dick or something. Like an existential piece where he's really exploring what it means to be a man on the river.
to, to be both a steamboat and a Willy.
Yeah. What
No,
are you, a man or a mouse? Some days I can't even tell myself.
this is writing itself. Um, the very first thing I saw after the release was a very graphic but well drawn image of Steamboat Willie sucking himself off, and somebody had put here's a character that I just created out of absolutely nowhere doing his special move, the Steamboat Willie, and I can only imagine like Disney executives with their suits and briefcases and stuff just freaking out.
How do we fix this?
The world's gone mad. We're dying by strokes. Um,
Oh,
oh, good
yeah,
time. That had a lot of stuff in it. Your story. I think I needed to unpack it just because it was really coming at me from different angles, and it felt
yeah,
very a product of its moment. I think. Um,
yeah. I definitely felt the struggle this time around.
mhm. Yeah.
It's some weeks, and it can be all kinds of factors, and I think it is important to talk about this because some weeks it's just hard to write. Sometimes you're tired or you've got a lot on, and maybe just inspiration isn't hitting. But push through and write something because I don't think it's definitely not the funniest thing I've ever written. It's definitely not the best story I've written, but I wrote something, and it had some bits that were good, and by the time I got to the end of it, I felt like I was sort of writing capably again. I
Mm,
was back in that sort of swing of how it feels or should feel to write. So I think it
found the
is
flow.
a good example of like just the biggest issue I had with approaching this prompt was me being unable to actually start writing something down.
We've obviously had loads of people on, and they all talk about the ways in which they either in the ways in which they overcome it, either by sheer force of will or by structure. Um,
Yeah,
but I think things like the drill book idea that we were speaking of a while ago,
yeah,
and having like a regular time of the day at which you write, these things do work,
yeah,
and all you have to do is sort of allow your brain, like, don't get annoyed at yourself, just do it, just have a go at it, and allow your brain time to spool up to full speed. um and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, come back the next day. But yeah, I'm really glad that you've spoken about this with this prompt, because theoretically I would have thought monkey would be quite an easy prompt in a way.
yeah,
It's very broad, and I think we sort of both like monkeys, don't we? So it's sort of, it should have really opened itself up. But I think if I would have struggled with it if I hadn't have accidentally encountered the story about Robert Fortune.
yeah.
So I can see where you're coming from, 100%.
I think that's a big thing as well. Like, it's quite often you get a prompt, it's even one that's very tight. These broad ones can be really good, but if you see it and something just sort of ping in the back of your head, and you write it down in your drill book or you just make a note of it somewhere, that spark, even if the story ends up completely different to what you were first thinking of, can be massive. And like I said, when I thought of monkey, all I could think of was that same stupid joke about a hot bath.
Yeah.
And it was almost like that was blocking me from doing anything sensible or creative. It's really, yeah, it's an interesting place to be in. And we've spoken about it before, but the prompts that don't quite, like, you don't gel with immediately or you struggle to get off the ground, it can be really surprising which ones they are.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Oh, what a time! What a time! Well,
One of
I've
the
I've
many
thoroughly
times.
loved hearing your story, man, and I'm very glad that I got to tell you mine. So, as ever, this is this is legit. We say at the start of the episode, but this is legitimately my favorite time of the week, because we put our heads together, we tell some stories, and we discuss them, and I can't see a better way to use an hour.
Well, there's only one thing left to do now. It's your fault. Let's go make a cup of tea.
Cup of tea. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?